Welcome everyone to this new webinar on cotton as part of our long-running series brought to you by the Crop History Consortium after two webinars dedicated to sesame and flax. As one of the main organizers of these online seminars, it is my great pleasure to introduce and animate this outstanding webinar on cotton. For those who aren't aware of the Crop History Consortium was founded at a seed meeting of the French Embassy in London in 2022, aiming to facilitate interdisciplinary discussion and synthesis of historical crop diffusion in the Middle East and Mediterranean, broadly during the past 3 millennia. We seek to bring together archaeobotanists and other archaeological scientists specialized in geometric morphometrics, ancient DNA, and geochemists, with historians and ethnobotanists, to produce interdisciplinary collaborative research and synthesis. The Crop History Consortium recently became an official community of the European Archaeology Association and a research group of the International Group of Paleoethnobotany. In addition to this webinar series, our activities include joint publications, workshops, conference sessions, and soon a series of interactive maps charting crop diffusion. These activities are currently funded by a UK Arts and Humanities Research Council networking grant awarded to Michel Alexander and Daniel Fuchs. This webinar has been made possible thanks to the work and commitment of several people. The leadership and contributions of Daniel Fuchs and Michel Alexander made possible the settling of this webinar series. Raquel Pierini and Raya Van David brought significant input regarding the webinar's planning and organization. I'd also like to thank our three outstanding speakers, Christopher Viot, Charlène Bouchaud, and Elsa Yvanez, renowned specialists on cotton history, who have agreed to participate to this seminar. Now, before introducing our speakers as moderator, I would like to remind a few things for the seminar to run fluently. First, as Anna Den Hollander had to cancel participation as discussant, we don't have a proper discussant, even if I will try to do my best to fulfill this role. Nevertheless, our speakers will have a little bit more time to present their work, but I ask them to not exceed 20 minutes each if possible. I will keep them aware of their time by writing in the chat when they will be at 15 minutes of their talk, but if they want to have an idea of where they were in the presentation, they can ask me directly. At the end of the three presentations, I will start briefly the discussion to facilitate the scientific exchange between our three speakers. And finally, we'll have a question and answer session allowing the audience to ask questions through the chat. So don't hesitate to drop your questions that I will communicate to our speakers. Now, without delay, let me introduce you our first speaker, Christopher Viot. So a specialist in cotton breeding and molecular genetics, he is an agricultural engineer with a PhD in population genetics. His scientific activities began around seabird genetics, but from then mainly dealt with cotton varietal improvement in sub-Saharan Africa and South America, and with studies of cotton and cacao evolution and domestication. More recently, his research focused on cotton domestication, diversification, and dissemination. Geneticist for 39 years in CIRAD, France Research Center for Tropical Agriculture, and is now retired since April 11, 2026, and we are glad to count him among us. Over to you, Christopher.
Thank you. So I was a cotton breeder, and now I speak about cotton, its history and its prehistory. Here you can see a wild cotton in the case in Florida case. So it is the same species, but a wild type, the same species that cotton most cultivated on worldwide, the species Gossypium hirsutum. So this is, of course, a much improved recent variety in very good cultivation conditions. The wild, this wild cotton produces a very small balls and with a few seeds and a very short and reduced quantity of fiber. This long fiber we called lint. In comparison with the modern one, the wild one is this, the seed is there, and the two men, humans use the fiber they take from the seed to make thread and textiles. Cotton cultivation at worldwide level is nowadays as this. That's the greener means more density of production, of course. Xinjiang in China, India make around half of world production. If we had then Pakistan, Brazil, United States, we have more or less 75% of world annual production of cotton. There are places with low density of production, and the eastern part of China, which was an important producing region until the last century, nowadays produces only less than 10% of China production. Cotton, the cultivated cotton belonged to a genus we called Gossypium, and it has a worldwide repartition. This phylogenetic tree shows how it evolved and went to colonize all tropical regions worldwide. And so this genus, this species of these Gossypium species are very good at traveling at very long distances, over very long distances. What concerns us is the four domesticated species: tree cotton, arboreum, levant cotton, Gossypium herbaceum, upland cotton, the most cultivated worldwide, which is named Gossypium hirsutum scientifically, and Paima cotton in South America. There are wild cottons, but they are in restricted regions. Before the present situation of cotton cultivation, we have had a global, worldwide level, exchanges of varieties and species, such as this, with the dates in years before present. So in blue, Gossypium arboreum, the tree cotton, went to Africa, to Mesopotamia, and was also brought by people going to colonize nowadays United States. The same for the cotton, the levant cotton, herbaceum, the African cotton, in red, which went into Central Asia, then went to be cultivated in India, and also was probed in United States in the 17th century. The Paima cotton from South America was diffused at the level of this continent, and only with the Columbian exchanges did it reach Africa, hypothetically, at least. And while the upland cotton diffused first in towards Central America and towards North America before going to Europe and elsewhere. There was, before present times and before the global exchanges, some diversification with exchanges at continental level, but it's of course very poorly known, as we have no more access to varieties that disappeared with the globalization. But there was a continental level disseminations. The dissemination can be reconstructed, and that's the aim of the central subject of this presentation. From the centers, the domestication centers in the Indus River Valley for tree cotton, and from the Nile Valley. We don't know precisely from where, but we guess that was at the north of Nubia, the Herbaceum cotton, that is the Levant cotton, disseminated towards Central Asia and more lately towards Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. There are places where we don't know which species appeared around 1,000 years ago. To explain better the big difference between the two cotton species domesticated in Asia and Africa, we could see that there is a big difference in time, in the time when they began their dissemination. The tree cotton from India began nearly 5,000 years ago, and it disseminated for on around 2,500 years to over Asia, while the cotton, the African cotton, the Levant cotton, began its dissemination only around 2,000 years ago, before present. That's 2,500 years later. And its dissemination was very fast to reach, in the first step, reaching the Central Asia in 500 years. It is thus two very contrasted dissemination models that we'll try to explain somewhat at levels of the civilizations and the level of climate adaptations and the level of domestication and diversification and adaptation by the selection done by humans. If we take into account the distances, that is in kilometers and straight line distances, such as here, around a bit more than 2,000 kilometers from the domestication, hypothetical domestication center in Indus Valley towards the south of India, and so on. So we have dissemination towards northern India, towards southern China, towards eastern China, towards Indochina, which it reached there, but we can't take everything in consideration in the computations. While the Levant cotton, the first clear cultivation was in Kasr Ibrim, near Aswan in the Nile Valley, more than 2,000 years ago. And it disseminated very quickly towards northern Egypt, toward the western oasis at the west of the Nile River, and towards Central Asia, including the Xinjiang, and later, more than half a millennium later, towards Central China. It reached rather quickly the Fezzan, which is a site of with oases in central Libya, but took much time before reaching Sub-Sahara. Taking to consideration dates and distances. We have for the tree cotton a diffusion or dissemination rhythm, which is around 1 kilometer per year. It is more or less the same pace for dissemination of wheat after its domestication more or less 10 or 8,000 years ago for wheat to reach Northern Europe. This rhythm, it was a seminal work by Cavalli Sforza, which established that the cotton dissemination, wet dissemination was at the rhythm of more or less 1 kilometer per year. And it was done by simultaneously the dissemination of different peoples. It is more or less what should have occurred in the Indus Valley, where the cotton dissemination was more or less Indus Valley and Mesopotamia and China were more or less 1 kilometer per year. Quite different is the situation for Levant cotton, which disseminated primarily in half a millennia over distances that are impressive. This makes its speed in the order of 5 to 10 kilometers per year. One aspect of this dissemination is that it was over arid or hyper-arid regions and going from one oasis point to another. So there was no the same progress, geographical progress. What is very different with Levant cotton is that it reached regions where there are true winters. That is, winters with very cold temperatures that make the survival of the plant absolutely impossible. And the same is when it reaches dry regions, for instance, is here, because during when there is no irrigation water, the plant will die. So there must have been a selection that permitted this cotton to establish in these regions and reach the desertic or sub-arid regions in Xinjiang, for instance. So it is much different. In Africa, the situation is special because mostly we can say that archaeological data are missing or are in too low quantities, and it makes much uncertain the progress, to establish the progress. But more or less, we have some, according to the timeline here, and some geographic, some geographic pattern. We have some progress, which and cotton reaching the Senegal and the Gambia River Valley, the Casamance, only a few centuries before now. We have points that we call layers. So, this one is very uncertain because it's only a stratigraphic datation. But so this point is in Northern Sahel, is nowadays totally desertic. There are very few bushes only, and no cultivation of annual plants. it was deduced that Esuk, the site, archaeological site is Tanmeka, was only a hub for caravans crossing the Sahara. But we'll revisit this. An interesting point is in India, in Mergar, this copper bed, you see the color of oxidized copper. The copper bed has a hole inside because there was a thread. And fortunately, the thread inside was protected by the mineralization of the cotton fibers. Thus it established the study of one colleague from the museum in Paris, established that cotton fibers, a thread of cotton fibers was used probably to hold many copper beds in sort of a necklace. It is unmistakable, it is cotton fibers. And thus, nearly 8,000 years ago, people in this region were able to make cotton threads, which means that using cotton was mastered, and thus the limit to the dissemination of cotton was not technology relative to the cotton fiber. The cotton fiber is very short, so it is less easy than hemp or flax or wool even to use. But this extraordinary finding and study show that some technology was mastered at 8,000 years ago. Because what is very impressive about cotton is the time, how many thousand years were before the first archaeological cottons and the beginning of the dissemination. And there must be an explanation. And then it's true for each crop domestication by humans. So fiber technology was not the problem. Suppose that the problem was in agronomical and was to make the transition to what we call domestication. And one essential point of domestication is transforming the plant to one that we can sow and reproduce easily, and to one that produces correctly. Only less than 200 years ago, cotton in India was still, some part of cotton, certainly, but a big part was still such as this, very primitive. And it takes to transform I only just reproduced the plant here to explain, and to go from this to this, which is nowadays the morphology of cotton, takes enormous time spans. An essential point in the dissemination of the Levant cotton must have been that 2,000 years ago, the silk roads or silk roads were already established. And it must have accelerated the dissemination of crops such as cotton. In Africa, the logic could have been the dissemination from Fezzan to Tanmeka, crossing the Sahara, but the main routes were north to south. And cotton was already present hundreds of years before there was present in Northern Africa. The dissemination could have been helped by in Asia, towards Central Asia, must have been helped but by the many trade routes and empires. A very important point about cotton dissemination was that and domestication was that there was the Green Sahara until around 5,000 years ago. Thus, cotton could exist in the Nile Valley in wild form and be present. And this could explain the presence of cotton, the development of cotton cultivation 2,000 years ago in Egypt, and the presence of cotton in the hyper-arid site of nowadays Sahara in Essouk, because there was the medieval 1,000 years ago humid period with humid Sahel. I'll show you the Sahara as nowadays, and the Sahara during the Green Sahara, which permitted plants to grow and which could explain remains of cotton here, which could have grown. Here is a cotton plant, wild, totally wild in Sub-Africa. The same models can not be found exactly in Mesoamerica with upland cotton. There was a very local dissemination during much time. The dissemination, probably with the Maya domestication here. If cotton was domestication more or less 8 or 7,000 years ago, it didn't involve civilizations, which are here only, but what we call cultures or pre-civilizations. Cotton predates civilizations, the same as alimentitious crops, because the condition for urban development is that agricultural production be developed and much productive. In South America, it was a very special fact with a domestication for the use as fishing nets and fishing lines, because cotton has a very good behavior in water and the dissemination. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christopher. That was really, really impressive, really interesting. So much to learn and so much to debate after. So thank you very much for your participation. So now, let me introduce you to Charlène Bouchaud. Charlène Bouchaud is a research fellow at the CNRS and hosted at the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. She is an archaeobotanist specialized in the study of seed, fruit, and wood charcoal remains. Her research focuses on the relationships between past human societies and plants in the Arabian Peninsula and northeastern Africa, mainly between the 1st millennium BC to the 1st millennium CE. She is particularly interested about the spatial and chronological dynamics of plant agrobiodiversity and fuel resources, and of course, the origins and the diffusion of cotton in the Old World in longue durée perspective. Over to you, Charlène.
So thank you, Vladimir, for the very nice presentation, and I would like to thank you and all the organizers for inviting me to this meeting. And I'm glad to be here today with my two colleagues, Christopher and Elsa, to talk about cotton. So Christopher has already made a very good presentation of the genetic and ecological requirement of the ancient cotton. So I will go directly to the earth of the subject here, which focus on the introduction of cotton in Arabia. And I will not talk about the earliest finds of cotton, but we can discuss about that after. And as you can see, several colleagues are associated to this presentation. And so I thank again Vladimir, but also Elora Chambreau, Juliette Millon, Saskia Ryan, and Margaret Tenberg to this presentation. So the first time I met cotton was at the beginning of my PhD thesis about 15 years ago. And it was like that, black and small and charred. And I found a lot of these seeds and I didn't know what they were. And after I found that it was cotton seeds, and these cotton seeds were found at CIRAD, and Christopher already presented you briefly this site located in the Arabian Peninsula, in the Western Arabian Peninsula. And so I will come back later to that site, but before I want to present you the Arabian Peninsula, which is mainly covered by deserts with low rainfall, placing the area in hyperarid and or arid bioclimatic zones, except in some regions in the south. And these conditions prevailed since about 6,000 years ago with minor climatic oscillations. And in parallel, oasis settlements emerged during the early and middle Bronze Age. And from that time, evidence appears for the presence of various crops, cereals, pulses, date palm, and so on, according to different chronological patterns across the region. So the oldest reliable mention of cotton in Arabia arrived much later than that in form of written description made by Theophrastus. He reported that the island of Bahrain produces the wool-bearing tree, and cotton textiles and cotton seeds have been found at the same place associated with earlier archaeological context, relatively dated to the 6th, 4th century BCE. And we performed a radiocarbon date on one of these seeds, unfortunately placing it at a much later date during the medieval period. So although that this is quite disappointing, it shows the extreme importance of radiocarbon dating, most of all when the archaeological context is not secure enough. So far, the first direct archaeological proof of cotton in Arabia comes from CIRAD, modern Madain Saleh. The site is mainly known for the Nabatean monumental tombs surrounding the town, which was occupied between the 5th century BCE and the 5th century CE, and located on a key trading route. The site is part of the Nabatean kingdom before to be integrated to the Roman Empire, and the climate is arid, but the presence of a high water table makes the region fertile for human occupation and agricultural activities. More than 100 wells have been found, and they are distributed to the east of the town, which is located here on the map. Do you see my mouse? Yeah, okay. And so we performed archaeobotanical samples in the town, and you see at the bottom of the slide a photo of one of the sectors of the habitats. And we also worked in some of the tombs surrounding the urban center. And the vast majority of plant remains are charred, except in the tombs where the material is desiccated. The archaeobotanical study shows the existence of an oasis based on date palm cultivation from the mid-1st millennium BC onwards, completed with other fruits and cereals. And we observe a crop diversification during the following Nabatean period. And at that time, we got the first secure identification of cotton seeds radiocarbon dated. The crop diversification is more pronounced when the town integrates the Roman Empire after the early 2nd century CE, and cotton seeds are more widely found at that time. And the last period of occupation sees the permanency of the fauna crops, date palm, cereal, olive, fig, pomegranates, grape. And it is during that period that cotton seeds are the most widely attested, and hundreds of charred cotton seeds were uncovered in the residential town complex. We assume that the seeds were waste products of fiber processing, discarded directly after a ginning process. And we also consider that they could have been used for different purposes because of their rich oil content, as it is the case today, such as fodder for ruminants, lighting oil or fuel. But we don't we don't have any clear evidence of such use in the past. So they are just a hypothesis. In addition, the Nabatean tubes contained a lot of material, sometimes mixed because of regular looting in the past. And the interdisciplinary analysis of the material led to the reconstruction of part of the Nabatean funerary practices. The textile study was carried out by Patricia Dalpra, who showed that cotton textile were used as shrouds along with linen and wool. Here on this slide, you have the radiocarbon dates directly made on cotton seeds and textiles. One of the textiles gives the most ancient date so far for cotton evidence in Arabia between the mid-1st century BCE and the 1st century CE, while the other dates confirm the continuous presence of cotton at Shigra during the Nabatean-Roman and post-Roman occupations. At about 20 kilometers to the south of Higra, the archaeological site of Dadan is occupied from the Middle Bronze Age, from the mid-3rd millennium BC, to the medieval period during the 12th century. On the left side, you have the location of the different excavation areas and some photos that illustrate the diversity of the occupation. The archaeobotanical study is still in progress and is part of the PhD thesis recently defended by Elora Chambreau. And the results show the presence of quite homogeneous oasis crops through time, so the common one, dead palm, other fruits, cereals, etc. And cotton, among them this very beautiful desiccated seed, appears during the late antiquity, during the 6th century CE. So just after Egra was abandoned. And this shows the continuity in cotton use despite of settlement shift and population dynamics at regional scale. So then we move to the east of the Arabian Peninsula, and I present you a third archaeological site named Mleiha. The excavation revealed a building destroyed by a fire during the early 3rd century CE, which was likely dedicated to store trade goods. The fire has allowed the exceptional preservation of botanical assemblages studied by Vladimir Dabrowski. And the dataset includes common oasis crops and foreign taxa such as paper, Asian rice, and mung beans, as you can see the photo here. And the presence of these crops, as well as pottery studies, reveal strong trade connections between Mleiha and the Indian subcontinent. Cotton seeds, balls, and cotton textiles have been found in the building, and calibrated edges of 2 pieces of cotton textile are in line with the archaeological context. So this map is a cotton state of the art, but please be aware that it's a state of the art a bit old, because I didn't work on it for 3, 4, maybe 5 years now, at least, and I didn't integrate the last discoveries of cotton in Central Asia, so be indulgent with that map. And so it integrates the 3 Arabian discoveries at Shigra, Dadan, and Mleiha, with other broad contemporary finds of cotton seeds in red, textile in orange, and texts mentioning cotton in shades of blue-gray, depending on the resolution of information. And based on this evidence, the scientific consensus indicates the as a cotton production center, the Indian subcontinent, Mesopotamia, and northeastern Africa. And so in this general framework, it was important for us to understand if cotton in Arabia was cultivated locally or was imported, and which species were involved, like the question already presented by Christopher before. So in order to answer to the question of provenance, we launched a collaboration on geochemistry between our lab and a laboratory of the climate and environmental science. And Saskia Ryan was the postdoc working on that topic. And we performed a strontium analysis, which is a very nice tool to prevent study because the strontium isotope value of soil, water, and rainwater are recorded in plant tissues. And in that way, the strontium isotope values measured in cotton can thus be characteristic of the region in which it grew. And so we started the study with mleiha, which was easier to study because the material came from one unique context. The strontium isotope values of cotton finds were compared to other archaeological and modern materials. So on the graph from left to right, you see first the strontium values of, from India, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, and the values obtained on reference material in the United Arab Emirates, which are detailed on the top right as well. And then on the bottom right, you have the values from mleiha, including those from modern plants, archaeological cereal grains, supposed to be of local origin, and cotton, boll, seeds, and textiles. And the range of strontium isotope ratio for cotton material from mleiha appears in gray, dark, and light in the general graph and in the detail. And so the results show that the ratios for cotton material at mleiha are higher than the local values, but they match quite well with the values coming from India, in particular in the Gujarat region, which is known to be a production region of cotton in the past. So we assume that cotton was likely imported from that region. And we performed the same study at Hira and Dedan. Here, the strontium isotope values on modern plants and waters that define the local range are indicated with a green strip and oblique lines around. In yellow and red, you have the strontium isotope ratios on regional and local modern plants. In blue, the values on archaeological crops that are not cotton, and so dead palm and cereals are supposed to be local. In green, the values on cotton seeds, and in orange, the values on cotton textile at Shigra and then at Dadan. And so the results confirm what we already assumed from the quantity of seeds found at both sites, namely that cotton grew locally. It was more a surprise for the textiles because the textiles are more likely to travel. And here the value, so in a range, shows that part of the textile, at least, were locally produced. Some seeds and one textile, so one textile here and some seeds, exceed the local range and could therefore be non-local. And if so, this would mean a mixture of importation and local production existed in the past. So the results provide so far the earliest and most abundant evidence for cotton growth in Arabian dead palm gardens. Radiocarbon and relative dating indicate that the oasis was efficient enough to integrate the cotton among the crops for at least 400 years at Higraz and during the 5th century at Dadan, and likely more because we recently found cotton seeds in medieval occupation. We think that cotton was cultivated as a small tree. This is based on textual mention from other regions, as well as recent examples of cotton tree cultivation in the oasis of Alula, as shown here on the left and on the right in Sudan in the early 20th century. The strontium analysis also shows that cotton shoots used in the tombs were likely manufactured within the town of Higura, which was relatively unknown so far since we hardly evidence the presence of tools used for textile craft. In addition, the strontium analysis also reveals that some exchange or external supply of cotton likely existed in parallel of local production. A final outstanding issue I would like to address is that of the species involved in this process was Gossypium arboreum from India or Gossypium herbaceum coming from Africa, like Christopher presented before, or both of them. So indeed, it is not possible to separate cotton species based on the morphology of the seed. And so we carried out morphometric study on the 4 domesticated species, so Herbaceum, Arboreum, but also Barbadense and Hirsutum, coming from America. And I supervised a PhD student on that topic in collaboration with colleagues from the National Museum of Natural History, and Christopher was also involved. And the study was carried out by Juliette Milon. So as you can see, the seed has an ovoid shape that makes the morphometric study quite tricky. And the study relied on the analysis of linear measurements, so the length, width, and thickness, as well as on geometric morphometric based on an outline analysis. And so I will not go into the detail, but directly to the results. And the relative results show first that the seeds of the 2 American tetraploid species, so Gossypium barbadense and Hirsutum, differ from the 2 diploid species, Herbaceum and Arboreum, in simple length measurements, which can be of interest for people working on modern period when the 4 species may have cohabited, especially in Africa. And experimental charring that we have conducted induces size reduction, but no major shape deformation, which is great because the majority of the archaeological material is it's charred. After when we integrated the archaeological seeds, we observed that the form of the archaeological cottons, here in red on that slide, largely differ from the modern ones. So at least they are closer to the diploid species, Gossypium arboreum and Herbaceum. They are closer to that species than to the American species, which is what it was expected, so it was a good news. But there is no clear difference between species within the archaeological group, and we were not able to differentiate the species. So far, the morphometric study is quite inconclusive, and we are thinking to other way to move forward. So to conclude, we can say that the spread of cotton in Arabia results from trade dynamics before the Islamic period. We also show the importance of multi-proxies analysis and radiocarbon dating to figure out the diffusion path. We saw that cotton was imported from India to Mleiha in Eastern Arabia, and that cotton was likely a sustainable production in the oasis of Hira and Dadan during several centuries. I am right now in a break of cotton, but when I will decide to patch things up with it, I think we should first update the state of the art, and we will continue the morphometric studies. Waiting for that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be glad to discuss with Elsa and Christopher after the Elsa presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlène, for your presentation. It was really interesting, and I love how in your work we see the contributions of archaeobotanists, textual mentions, and the use of morphometrics. And you didn't present the ancient DNA analysis, but we will maybe talk about it later in the discussion. So now let me introduce you Elsa Yvanez. Elsa Yvanez is an associate professor of textile archaeology at the Center for Textile Research, Saxo Institute at the University of Copenhagen. She is an archaeologist specialized in the textile production of the ancient Nile Valley, in the chain operatoire and economic significance of spinning and weaving, as well as in the use of textiles for clothing and burial. From 2022, she is leading the Fashioning Sudan, Archaeology of Dress Practices along the Middle Nile project, with the support of the European Union's Horizon Europe program. Over to you, Elsa.
Thank you for the introduction, Vladimir, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk today at the Crop History Consortium on this special seminar on cotton. I will take you a little bit further down the line of the chaîne opératoire and focus very much on cotton textiles, particularly objects that were manufactured in a region of the Middle Nile Valley, which corresponds to modern Sudan and Nubia, and are mostly dated to the 1st to the 4th century CE. So I've started this research a very long time ago, and I've had the chance to collaborate with Charlène, among other people present today. But we have been starting, let's say, to bring a little bit new data also as part of the Fashioning Sudan project, which, as Vladimir mentioned, is hosted at the Center for Textile Research under, thanks to funding from the European Union. All right. So the project itself is looking at dress practices specifically, so not necessarily textiles. We are also looking at garments made of animal skin, but we are very much sort of like covering different aspects of these dress practices from the preserved garments in the archaeological records, but we're also very much looking at resources, economic production, and of course the society that made and used these items of clothing. One of the axes of our research is the ecology of garment production, in which we are using different types of techniques and methods to identify the species that were used for garment production, and that is either plant or animal species, but also the way they were manufactured. So when we come to the sort of vegetal landscape of Sudan and Nubia, the two plant fibers that were used for textiles are flax, for linen textiles, and cotton. Just as a brief reintroduction, so to say, because Christopher has presented part of these archaeobotanical, let's say, regional sources related to cotton in this region. So we are very much located in the Middle Nile Valley in the eastern part of Africa, where cotton has been found in different forms, including archaeobotanical remains, and identified as the species Gossypium herbaceum. The first well-dated and contextualized finds come from Cassibrim, dated to just before the turn of the modern era, but we also have other finds from the 1st to the 3rd or 4th century CE from the island of Meroe, so further south, if you can see my cursor, right here in central Sudan. So I personally work very much with textiles, not necessarily with archaeobotanical remains. So far, together with my colleague Madalina Wozniak, we have tried to track the use of different types of fibers along the material, let's say dated to the late antiquity to the first part of the medieval period. I focus very much on the Meroitic period, especially in the time bracket that can be dated to 50 BCE to 350 CE. That is when we have the largest number of preserved textiles. And you can see here on this graph, the blue lines correspond to cotton, that cotton fibers was the main fiber, the fiber of choice during the Meroitic period. Or I should say, at the very least, that it was the fiber that is the most represented in our preserved corpus, which is, of course, very much dependent on archaeological biases. So these textiles are mainly soft furnishings, so blankets and sleeping surfaces, this type of things, and garments. So to situate a little bit where we are in this chaîne opératoire of cotton, I will use the very handy diagram drawn by Charlène Bouchaud in a previous publication. And today I will show you quite a lot of fibers, but we will talk very much about spinning, which is the process by which fibers are assembled together. Further down the line of the chaîne opératoire, we will see a few examples of dyed textiles, but I will not focus too much on that. And usually, as you will see, it is dyed in indigo, so in blue color. And of course, now the cursor Yeah. After we will very much talk about weaving, which is the process by which threads are assembled together in a textile. And that is done on a tool called a loom. And in the context of ancient Sudan for this time period, we are considering the warp-weighted loom, in which the warp is put in tension thanks to loom weights. We will also see a few decoration, mainly embroidery, fringes, and tapestry, but all in all, mainly talk about textiles. All right, so let's start this process looking at fibers. I will try to frame this presentation within documentation coming from one cotton fabric that was found on Sai Island in Middle Nubia in Sudan. That has been radiocarbon dated to the 2nd or 3rd century CE. And it's coming from a grave in this case. I'll show you more about the context later on. So this is what a cotton textile look like when it is not charred. In a desiccated environment, you can see that a lot of the fibers have sort of come out of the thread and are kind of creating this little fuzz on top of the textiles. And this is due very much to the morphology of the fiber of cotton, very easily to recognize, as Christopher mentioned. So the fiber of cotton fiber is sort of like ribbon-like. It's a little bit flat and slightly curved, depending on in cross-section, I mean, depending on the maturity of the fiber, which you can see here on the macroscopic slide made by my colleague Mohamed Nasreddin. And one of the main characteristics of the cotton fibers is that it has an internal torsion. So the fiber kind of like twirls upon itself in some areas. And that's one of the reasons why it ends up looking like this in the final product. So here you see micro city images that have been done thanks to my colleague from Lorient University, Alain Bourmeau and Romane Batardière at the Synchrotron in Grenoble. That shows the same sample, the same textiles, in two different, or in cross-section and so 3D of the thread, where you can again see the same type of morphological signs. The images at the bottom show that the fibers are very much composed of the cellulose part with a rather small proportion for the lumen. And you can see again this telltale torsion of the fiber. These images are also doubly interesting for us because I think it shows very clearly how the thread was made from the inside, so to say. So in Sudan or in the Nile Valley in general, the traditional spinning direction is what we call S direction, meaning it is twisted counterclockwise, which is something we see from the Dynolite photo, but what I appreciate from the pictures here is that you see that the threads were very much over twisted almost. The angle of the thread is indeed quite sharp, which is of course needed if you want these short fibers to kind of like stick together and form a strong thread, which would then be able to sustain the weight of the loom weights and the tension implied by the loom. So usually these threads have a diameter situated around 0.6 millimeters, a little bit under, a little bit over, it depends. And it tends to be quite regular through the textile. So now this slide is going to show you a little bit the main constituent of these meroitic textile garments or textile in general. And they are indeed very, very regular through the production. It is something that we see again and again and again. So we are in presence of a cotton production that is quite standardized in many ways. So the ground weave of the textile is always what is called a tabby weave, so a simple under over. Here you have an example of a simple one, 1-1, but we also have variations. Then of course we have an upper edge and a lower edge. On the sides you have what is called the selvages. And one of the particularities of the cotton textiles from this period and location is that they are quite frequently decorated with these tapestry bands in blue very often, and completed at the bottom by a complex border made of open work and tasseled fringes. That is the very sort of archetypical cotton textile for the Meroitic period. So here is what it could look like as an example of a very much like reinforced upper edge with a big cord. Here is a reinforced selvage. This time it is made with reinforced on the side by turning several times the weft around bundles of warp threads. I will explain it a bit later as well. And these two constituents are very much characteristics of the use of the warp-weighted loom. And finally, these bottom parts, these bottom borders formed by an open work border and these tasseled fringes. This example here also show a blue band. So just to like give a little bit more like other examples of this is typical ways to finish a textile, either by making these thick cords or by leaving the warp threads hanging free as fringes. And on the upper, on the starting border, we also have this type of traits. What I would like you to just remember here, because it's what the most important part really for the discussion later on, is that these textiles were made with looped warps. So you can see the vertical threads are looped at the top. And usually these starting borders are reinforced either with cords, like here, or with using more threads in a horizontal weft system. And this is, again, very, very characteristic of the warp weighted loom. It's the way that you need to warp the loom, so to arrange, to create the textile information, you need to do this, this kind of setup. And that was not the way that textiles were made traditionally along the Nile Valley, where, for example, during the Pharaonic period, we are in a presence of horizontal ground loom or vertical two-beam loom, where you do not have necessarily this type of borders. And just to finish with this sort of like typical ID card of the Meroitic textiles, here is an example, a quite complex one, of these open work borders from Sai, again, that were created between two rows of countertwining, where basically the warps, so the vertical threads, were grouped and regrouped and separated, and wrapped with an extra thread. So it created this type of lattice pattern. And then finally, they are finished by these long fringes. Together with a weaver, a colleague here at the Center for Textile Research, we have done several experiments of this technique. And we found that it is indeed a very, very good way to basically exploit the very long length of threads that are left at the bottom of a textile woven on a warp-weighted loom. You need to have this extra length of thread to attach the loom weights and to set the whole thing in tension. But if you cut the textile right after you finish the weave, it is kind of a waste. You're always like, you know, you have to cut all of this length off. And in that way, with this type of border, you really end up with a very decorative, high impact border for your clothing and minimize waste. So we thought it was quite interesting to relate that to the tool. Now, to go back to the textile that we started this presentation with, this is the piece where the samples have been taken from. These different fragments, as well as other ones, were found in situ along the lower body of a naturally mummified body of a female, of a woman, that you can see here mapped in yellow in situ photo. They were also finished by fringes, not open work, but fringes. And in this case, I think it is safe to identify this textile as a sort of skirt, or what we have called a lower body wraparound, which you see here illustrated on a funerary stela representing a woman dated from similar time period from Lower Nubia as well. And with the fringes, we can reconstruct it as so. And in that case, you would use the entire rectangle, the entire weave from the loom, directly from the loom, and you can wrap it up around the body and you have your finished garment. In the case of male textiles, we are in a slightly different situation in which the textile, so the rectangle that you created of the loom, can be cut and sewn to shape, so tailored. And in that case, we see this recurring type of outfit, which includes a loincloth and a front panel that was worn on top of the body, in front of the legs. And both of them were decorated with this very characteristic embroidery pattern made in the same technique and always in blue. So again, we are in the presence of very recurring forms and techniques that were in both cases, both male and female outfits, very much associated to the clothing of elite members of the society. We see it in iconography, but we also see it from the graves because all of these finds come from elite cemeteries. So I have alluded so far a few times to the link between cotton production, cotton weaving in ancient Sudan and the use of the warp-weighted loom. This is attested through the discovery of loom weights. You see here examples from Amadab, a site where cotton archaeobotanical remains were also found. So again, it's something that we see carried out through several sites. But I would say that it was also very much kind of alluded by the textiles themselves. As I mentioned before, we have these starting borders, these selvages that have these reinforced, these looped threads, reinforced borders that are kind of characteristic to the warp-weighted loom, as we know it's practiced from different time and regions, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean. But finally, the last clue, so to say, came from the site of Cassie Brim, amazing site for the preservation of organic remains and textile craft in a southern border of Egypt, but at the time was part of the Meroitic Kingdom, where excavation at the end of the 90s found several cotton heddles. So a heddle is this type of like loop system that was arranged and attached at the heddle bar here that permitted the manipulation of the different sheds of the textiles. And here it is made entirely of cotton. So I think we have a very good link between weaving in a warp-weighted loom and cotton production at the time. But for me, it has always been a little bit of a puzzle when I started working on this material, because as I mentioned before, the previous traditions based on flax, a little bit on wool, but most of the data that we had for Egypt, but also earlier periods in Sudan, showed that it was woven according to completely different techniques and looms. So here I was with this chronological horizon, started with, let's say, the beginning of the Common Era, with loom weights on Meroitic sites, quite a lot of cotton textile finds, and archaeobotanical finds. And it was a little bit, for me, difficult to understand how these all show up at the same time, very localized. So recently I have tried to trace let's say, the arrival of the warp-weighted loom in the Nile Valley, and more data started coming up from recent excavations in settlements in Egypt. So several loom weight finds could be attributed to the late periods from the beginning of the first millennium BCE this time. And as we go through time, we see a sort of distribution southwards with more and more finds dated to the Ptolemaic period around 300 BCE onwards. Please bear in mind that this is an extremely preliminary map, not at all exhaustive. But what it seems to be showing is a movement of weaving techniques coming probably from the eastern part of the Mediterranean basin, where the warp-weighted loom was very much in use in the Aegean, in the Levant, the Near East in general. That is sort of like trickling down, let's say, the Nile Valley, trickling south, and very much adopted in Meroitic Sudan. And here we see Sudan as a sort of a crucible of different technologies, because the raw material, as we understand it today, was actually coming from more like, let's say, the domestication of the raw material was coming from the south. Dorian Fowler, but other people who have been working on ancient Sudanese cotton hypothesized the regions of Kordofan or the Gash Delta as a possible location for the domestication of Gossypian Basim, with a movement going northwards, probably during the Meroitic Kingdom, when we see other crops that belong to this so-called savanna package doing the same sort of like trip down the Nile Valley northwards. So that would be cotton, millet, and sorghum. So in that case, we see a meeting, a synthesis of technologies and the raw material that is sort of like being merged and assembled in a very specific cotton tradition in Sudan at the beginning of the Common Era. And this is where the research stands today, and I hope to continue that, continuing these efforts of mapping, and hopefully also at one point work more on the question of provenance. So I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elsa. That was really, really interesting, very scientifically precise and accurate, and I learned so much. So now, before beginning the discussion, I would like just to let the audience know that they can drop their questions in the chat. In 5 or 10 minutes, when the discussion will be over, I will be able to communicate them into the speakers. So first, I would like to thank really our three speakers to this seminar. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fact that you highlighted the way each of you contribute to reconstruct the diffusion and adaptation processes of these plant fiber in human societies from an interdisciplinary point of view. That was really interesting. I would like to ask first if each of you have one question to ask to another. If you have something to say, one aspect in particular. I have so many to ask for each of you, so maybe I can let you know, or I can begin to ask you one to another if you want. If one of you has a particular question to ask to one another or not.
I have a lot as well.
But Charlène, you can start if you want.
Okay. So thank you, Christopher, Elsa. It's really, really great when we speak about cotton. Maybe first a question for Christopher. Among the different questions, because we don't have time to discuss a lot, but maybe regarding the assignation of species to the cotton finds, what are the elements to say that some cotton finds belong to one species rather than to another? And I am thinking especially to the finds in Central Asia or in Western Africa that are attributed to Gossypium herbaceum. What are the evidence or the elements to say that?
So there is nearly no data. The very few data. The only one that was in Casribrim. I think that the English team proved that 1,600 years ago, the cotton was the special of special Levant cotton in there, and it was very important. And in China, in Central Asia and Xinjiang, some works permitted from the teams there to establish that this was recent and old ancient cotton remains were from Herbaceum too, and nearly no other data are known. For the whole continent of Afro-Eurasia to establish with certainty which species was where, and it's only you can deduce from the fact that Herbaceum began to be cultivated in the Nile Valley very lately. All that was in Mesopotamia before 2,000 years ago must have been the Indian cotton. And then there is agronomically the fact that this Indian cotton stayed as a perennial which needs water all year long, and then all that was in either cold regions or dry regions was preferentially must have been preferentially the African cotton Herbaceum, and there is a logic, historic logic and agronomic logic, and but it's what specialists of the English or American teams in the past century already said. When you want to be certain which species is either Levant cotton or tree cotton, eh bien, you consider geography and facts like that, because morphologically it's very difficult to be certain. So, and I much admire your work in the museum, because with the geometric morphometry, geometric morphology studies, with isotope studies, with and so on, and you begin to
Yes.
to bring ways for this, and is fantastic. And no, we have very few data that are certain about which species was where. And for instance, we can read from some studies that in Nigeria, it is guessed that the tree cotton was cultivated 1,000 or 800 years ago, because Watt, in his 1-century-old book in 1907, said that there cotton from the arboreum species was cultivated. But it's very, we can say that it's very light as a proof.
And thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.
And regarding this debate about the identification of species of cotton, maybe Charlène, you can talk a little bit more about the DNA, ancient DNA you try to undertake on cotton seeds in Dadan, maybe or not?
Yes, I can just say that it doesn't work. No, I prefer to not talk about that today because I didn't have time to ask my colleagues. Maybe they are
Okay.
here, but to be brief, we try to extract ancient DNA from that beautiful cotton seed at Dadan that are desiccated, but it doesn't work. There is a lot of DNA, but not DNA of cotton. So
So no.
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, was that from uncharred remains or?
Yeah, from desiccated. Yes.
Yes, from
Okay.
uncharred. Yes, they are uncharred. They seem to be very nicely preserved, but they didn't contain any ancient cotton DNA.
What about the possibility of textiles?
But so far, I understood, but maybe Christopher, you will. So far, there is almost no DNA in fibers.
Christopher,
is that right? Okay.
Is there any DNA in cotton fibers?
In the lumen, in the center of the fiber, there's the rest of the cell. There, all is there, be it a chromosomal DNA, enfin, a nuclear DNA or organelles DNA, but it's in small quantities. Of course, it was one cell, but you must take into account that there is one phenomenon to produce all the cellulose of the fiber, that is an endoreduplication of DNA, that is local parts of the chromosomal DNA that are multiplicated to permit the production of all the proteins, enzymes, etc., for the production of cellulose. And so some parts of the chromosome nuclear DNA could be more frequent. But then it depends whether the thread or the textile has undergone chemical treatments that could have destroyed, or even simply washing and washing again, and then there will be degradation and denaturation of DNA, but it is present. And for instance, the Americans that are always very interested in being certain of what they buy, are discovered with the DNA inside the fibers that Egypt sold. Some merchants mixed hirsutum DNA to hirsutum fibers to Barbadacea fibers, and it was a big clash with enormous amounts of money so the techniques that are adequate for police for police investigations about the very small amounts of DNA that you find on fingerprints and so on should be adequate to find something about the very small quantities.
Okay, thank you. I have questions for Elsa. Did you notice any difference in the techniques between clothing and Schwartz used in funerary textiles, or anything that would yeah, some technical. I saw that those are different, but can you explain a little bit more further about that?
Actually, they were not different.
Right. Okay.
In the context of Meroitic funerary practices, they are not making shrouds from scratch, like solely for funerary practices, meaning that the great majority, 99.99999% of textiles we found in the graves are reused clothing or soft furnishings. So they are one and the same. Yeah, so there is no specific techniques. No,
Oh, okay.
not even specific items. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. And well, Charlène, I know you didn't study the textiles from Hegra, but did you remember what?
I think it was the same. But a lot of tombs are looted, so it's quite difficult to recognize all the process of the chaîne opératoire and so on. But I remember that it was the same observation, that there is no difference between and there was reused textile as well.
It's actually quite rare in ancient times to have shrouds that were made solely in a funerary purpose. We have a few in ancient Egypt in very few selected cases. But yeah, we have to remember that textiles were much more valuable than they are considered today. Reused to a thread of a life, for real. And so yeah, they very, very much end up in the tombs as the last reuse phases. It's something that starts to be more practice, at least around the Mediterranean basin, with the development of like religions of the book, let's say, very generally speaking, some of which had specific rites attached to specific textiles in burial, for burial practices.
Okay.
And do you think that there is a social meaning as well? Because I mean, it makes sense to to take the clothes from the life to go to the death.
Yeah, it very much depends. In the case of Sudan, for the period that I discussed, people were not dressed in their clothing. It's very rare, and fewer instances we can say, okay, they were wearing the garment as they were wearing them during life. Most of the time, they are repurposed as body wrappings. So it's a little bit difficult to say. There is definitely an effort to select textiles that were decorated, so sort of like display during the funeral. That might be something. But yeah, more than that, we don't have like offerings of textiles for the textile sake that we can interpret as such. They're always reused, or most of the time they are reused as wrappings. So we can't really say, oh, he was buried with his loincloth because it was an attribute of his statues. He was buried with his loincloth because it is what was around, maybe, or because it was an attribute of his statues, but it's difficult to pinpoint. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. Maybe we can let some people ask some questions. So Margareta has 2 questions or remarks addressed to Christopher concerning the dating of the early cotton string from America and the diffusion route of cotton throughout Central Asia. So maybe Margareta, if you're here, you can ask your question directly in live.
So I had 2 questions, so 1 remark and 1 question for Christopher. And thank you everyone for your nice presentations. We are listening here in the lab. And first of all, the datings of Mergar, they have changed since quite a lot, because there's been new dates and they are not as ancient as previously thought, which makes sense. So I think there's no particular date on that cotton string, but not earlier than mid 5th millennium, I would say, or 6th millennium. Sorry, so 2,000 years younger than than previously indicated. And then second thing is joins the question of Charlène, because she about distinction of different species, and I understand that's difficult, but I was thinking about trading routes that you established, and you made a trading route pass from Northern Africa, from Egypt, across until Central Asia. And I'm not really convinced, because there's a lot of trade going on in the Bronze Age, in the mid-3rd millennium, between the Indus Valley and Central Asia, Arabia and Mesopotamia. So cotton might have traveled in the 3rd millennium directly from subcontinent, Indian subcontinent, to Central Asia, and did not have to pass by from Egypt over from the north. So I think that's an alternative road there. So these were my remarks.
It's naturally, if this copper bed is not so old, it changes much the situation. So, but anyway, there is anyway very long, very long time spans between the first use of cotton and then the development of its cultivation and its use. It's 2,000 or 3,000 years. Only in Western South America it seems that it was it went faster, maybe because they were much interested by using cotton for fishing, as it was their means of living and eating there. So thank you for. I agree that it would be surprising that no commercial link could have brought crops or any cultural aspect of living in the Indus Valley through Pamir to and to Central Asia and all these civilizations there. But it's true that the cotton archaeological evidence are very patchy, and so till now, where there is, as Charlène said, it's a big problem to establish which species was in which place.
Thank you, Christopher. So we don't have any more questions for now in the chat, so don't hesitate to drop your questions, or the audience, if you have some questions. I will be able to transfer them. Do you have any questions to one another for now?
I have questions.
Daniel,
a question about the past, but I don't know. Maybe we need to finish. Are we over time?
I think we can have 5 minutes more.
Okay. So my question is just to ask, what's the likelihood of some sort of hybridization between the two old world cottons, the herbaceum and arboreum? Because based on the maps that Christopher and I think maybe also Charlène showed, they did seem to have overlapping ranges in the past. And so what's the likelihood that there was some genetic transfers going on? And do we have any hard evidence for that?
Maybe Christopher can answer this question.
There is evidence of hybridizations, interspecific. Very long ago, nearly 1 century ago, the first studies of chromosomes by staining chromosome showed that there are inversions on some of the chromosomes, and that creates descents that are less fit, and progressively in the progeny there is a selection of what works, and there is a return to more or less to each species, but with some transfer, but limited transfer from one species to the other. The same is for upland and Paima cotton, exactly the same for upland and Paima cotton in the America. And the natural transfers were possible when there was overlapping of the areas, and but mainly we don't create an forever living hybrid or hybrid line.
And also for Charlène on that theme, is there any chance that geometric morphometrics could help us distinguish these two species, or is that too far?
It's my hope, but so the first try we've done shows that there is a lot of mixing results. So I mean, the probability to infer one or on another species is too high, or is too low. Sorry. And so maybe it's a question of method. So we will try in the next following month another method of geometric morphometrics to see what we can have with this different method or not. So we just for the detail, we tried with the outline method, and now we are going to try with the elliptic Fourier transform method. So just for people who know that.
And so, okay, and last thing for Elsa,
Yeah.
what is the latest in terms of archaeological science techniques applied to textiles, and specifically as concerns these questions about, different species and origins and diffusion and so on?
And by that you mean cotton textiles, because of course it depends very much on what they're made of. If it's animal fibers, we go into a different realm. Yeah, as I see, something that I would like to develop much more for this kind of aspects. I don't believe very much in ancient DNA, I have to say. I mean, I hope that I will be proven wrong eventually, but so far we have had from textile no DNA preserved on, and I'm not talking about cotton here, I'm talking for wool. We didn't try many, but because of desiccation, we had low hopes, and they were confirmed. So the DNA for the specific identification of the species, I don't know yet. So far, not so promising. What I'm maybe more interested about, specifically for Sudan, because it seemed pretty clear that the species is Herbaceum, I would like to develop more strontium analysis. Because at one point we have seemingly an influx from different types of cotton textile in a later period that starts with the medieval times. The difference is not huge in terms of technology, but it's significant enough that we could hypothesize a different origin of the finished product, right? So not of the moving plant or the raw material, it's the whole question. Are textile traveling as finished woven product, as garments? Can they also travel as just like, let's say, boughs of cotton? Could they take a boat from India? Since I started my research, everlasting questions. So I would very much like to explore the possibilities for strontium isotopes. And it seemed that maybe for now, the resolution for Sudan is not really, really, really good because of the Nile River and the singular origin of the water and But maybe that would be the result would be distinguished enough if there is another origin from the Arabian Peninsula or India to actually contrast with local Nubian and Sudanese cotton. So that's what I would like to do in the future, maybe with Charlène, who knows? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elsa. And I think it's time to close seminar. Just to finish on one thing said Elsa about the potential importation of raw cotton balls, because it is the case actually in Leha, where we have the textiles, the seeds, but also the raw fibers with the seed fragments still on it. So yeah, they are actually imported maybe to protect the other products during transportation, or maybe as raw cotton for making textiles. We don't know, but yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. It's all a question of value chain.
Exactly.
What is worth to put on a boat?
Exactly. Maybe bad cotton for
for export. Yes.
Yeah, for transportation, for protecting other things. Okay, so thank you so much I would like to thank our three speakers, Christopher, Charlène, and Elsa, for your very valuable contributions to this new webinar, the third webinar of this series. I would like to thank also all the audience who stayed until the end to listen your contributions and participate to the debate. Now you have in the chat Ido published the newsletter if you want to be aware of the next seminar. Actually, we have normally a next seminar in June dedicated to hemp, and another one on September 10th on the second webinar dedicated to flax. We had the first one in last March, and we decided to do another one because we had too many people to invite. So we decided to make another one. So thank you so much once again, and I think I said everything I had to say, right, Ido or Daniel? I think. Yeah, perfect. So I wish you a very nice end of day, and I see you hopefully soon.
Thank you, Vladimir.